When a billionaire's blood debt came due, his terrified plus-size daughter was offered up as a cruel pawn to Chicago's most ruthless syndicate boss. Everyone expected the sacrifice to suffer horribly, but the moment those heavy doors locked behind them, the crime lord's actions sent shockwaves through the entire underworld. Chloe Harrington was never supposed to be seen. In the glittering cutthroat world of Chicago's elite real estate developers, the Harrington family was royalty. Her father, Richard Harrington, was a man who valued aesthetics above all else. He had a trophy wife, a sleek downtown penthouse, and a public image polished to a blinding shine. But Chloe, his only daughter, did not fit into his perfectly curated world. She was a plus-size girl with a brilliant mind, a fact that Richard found deeply embarrassing. While other socialites her age were paraded at charity galas and country club dinners, Chloe was hidden away in the windowless basement office of Harrington Holdings. She was a mathematical genius, a savant with ledgers and tax loopholes. By the time she was 22, she was the invisible architect keeping her father's crumbling, over-leveraged empire from collapsing. She worked 18-hour days, fueled by a desperate, pathetic hope that if she just made him enough money, her father would finally look at her with an ounce of pride. Instead, he sold her to a monster. It started when Richard's greed outpaced his daughter's ability to cover his tracks. He bypassed the banks and borrowed $15 million from the Vargas Syndicate, a ghost organization that controlled the city's underground ports, illegal casinos, and protection rackets. At the head of this syndicate was Nathaniel Vargas. Nathaniel wasn't an old-school mobster in a cheap suit. He was 32, lethally calm-educated, and operated with the cold precision of a military tactician. You did not cross Nathaniel Vargas. You certainly didn't embezzle his money to fund a string of failed luxury casinos in Macau. When the debt came due, Richard Harrington didn't have the money. The handover happened on a freezing Tuesday night in November, at an abandoned shipyard on the edge of Lake Michigan. Chloe had been told they were going to a late-night audit meeting. She sat shivering in the passenger seat of her father's Mercedes, clutching her oversized wool coat around her curves, clutching a leather briefcase full of financial documents. A convoy of black SUVs surrounded them in the rain. Men in dark suits stepped out, their faces illuminated only by the harsh glare of headlights. And then Nathaniel Vargas emerged. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a sharp jawline, and dark, calculating eyes that missed nothing. He carried no weapon, but the absolute authority rolling off him made the air feel thin. Richard Harrington stepped out of the car, his hands raised in a pathetic display of surrender. Chloe rolled down her window, just enough to hear her father's trembling voice over the freezing rain. "Nathaniel, please. The overseas accounts are frozen. I just need another month." "You don't have a month, Richard." Nathaniel's voice was smooth, a low baritone that cut through the sound of the storm. "You don't have an hour. 15 million plus interest, or my men start breaking down your legacy bone by bone." Richard swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically. Then he pointed a shaking finger toward the car, toward Chloe. "Take her," Richard blurted out the words, slicing through the frigid air. Inside the car, Chloe's heart stopped. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "What did you say?" Nathaniel asked, stepping closer, his expression unreadable. "My daughter. Chloe. Take her as collateral. As punishment. Do whatever you want with her." Richard stammered, stepping back, eager to put distance between himself and the Mafia boss. She's not much to look at. A bit of a heavy thing, useless at society events, but she can clean your floors. She can cook. Sell her to a trafficking ring. Torture her. Just take her and wipe my slate clean. Consider her a down payment on my life. Silence fell over the shipyard. Even Nathaniel's heavily armed enforcers men who had seen the darkest depravities of human nature seemed to freeze. A father was tossing his own flesh and blood to the wolves just to save his own skin, degrading her in the process. Nathaniel slowly turned his gaze to the Mercedes. Through the rain-streaked glass, he locked eyes with Chloe. She was weeping her face, pale, her knuckles white as she gripped her briefcase. She felt a profound, suffocating shame. Even in a moment of life and death, her father couldn't resist mocking her weight, reducing her to something worthless, something easily discarded. Nathaniel looked back at Richard, a profound disgust flickering in his dark eyes. "You're offering me your daughter as a punching bag to clear a $15 million debt. Yes, yes. Just take the fat cow and let me go," Richard pleaded. Nathaniel adjusted the cuffs of his tailored suit. He nodded to his right-hand man, Lorenzo. "Put the girl in my car." Two men approached the Mercedes. Chloe didn't fight. She was too broken. She stepped out into the freezing rain, her heavy coat soaked instantly. She didn't look at her father as she was escorted to Nathaniel's armored SUV. She climbed into the back seat, shaking violently, bracing herself for the end of her life. Outside, Nathaniel stepped within an inch of Richard's face. "The debt is paused, Richard, not cleared. If I find out this girl is as useless as you say, I'll be back for your head." Nathaniel got into the SUV sitting beside Chloe. The door slammed shut, sealing her inside a tomb of dark leather and the faint scent of expensive cologne. The engine roared to life, and as the convoy sped away from the docks, Chloe closed her eyes, waiting for the violence to begin. The drive to the Vargas estate took 45 minutes. Chloe sat pressed against the furthest door, making herself as small as physically possible. She expected Nathaniel to backhand her, to scream at her, to strip her of her dignity. But he didn't even look at her. He sat in the dim light, casually scrolling through his phone, completely unbothered. When they finally passed through the towering wrought-iron gates of the Vargas compound, Chloe gasped. It wasn't a gritty mob hideout. It was a sprawling, modern architectural marvel, nestled in 40 acres of private woodland. The SUV parked. Lorenzo opened the door and Chloe stepped out, her legs trembling so hard she nearly collapsed. Nathaniel walked past her, throwing his suit jacket to a waiting housekeeper. "Bring her to the East Wing," Nathaniel commanded. Chloe's breath hitched. The East Wing. A dungeon. A basement. "Here it comes." Lorenzo guided her through the mansion, up a grand, sweeping staircase, down a corridor lined with authentic Renaissance art, and stopped in front of double mahogany doors. He pushed them open and stepped aside. Chloe walked in and froze. It was a penthouse suite, a massive king-sized bed with Egyptian cotton sheets, a roaring fireplace, a walk-in closet larger than her old apartment, and a stunning marble bathroom. A tray of hot tea and fresh pastries was already waiting on the glass coffee table. "You'll sleep here," Lorenzo said gruffly, though his eyes held a strange pity. "The boss will see you in the morning. Lock the door if it makes you feel better. Nobody will come in." Before she could speak, Lorenzo closed the door. Chloe stood in the center of the lavish room, dripping wet, her mind short-circuiting. Was this a psychological game? Fatten her up before the slaughter? She stripped off her wet clothes, put on an oversized plush robe she found in the bathroom, and collapsed onto the bed, sobbing until she passed out from sheer emotional exhaustion. The next morning at precisely 9 a.m., a gentle knock woke her. A maid wheeled in a breakfast cart, loaded with eggs, bacon, fresh fruit, and coffee. Tucked under the silver cloche was a note. "My office. 10 a.m. NV. Chloe, dressed in the only dry clothes she had, her modest dark blue skirt and blouse from the night before, clinging slightly to her curves. She grabbed her leather briefcase, the one she had instinctively held on to during the kidnapping. If she was going to die, she at least wanted to understand why. Lorenzo escorted her to Nathaniel's office. It was a massive room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a private lake. Nathaniel was sitting behind a massive oak desk, wearing a crisp black shirt, reviewing a stack of files. "Sit, Chloe," he said, not looking up. She sat nervously on the edge of a leather chair. She hugged her briefcase to her chest, her stomach churning. "Your father believes you are worthless." Nathaniel began, his voice devoid of emotion. "He explicitly told me to use you for manual labor or sell you. He thinks because you don't fit into a sample-sized designer dress, your life has no value." Chloe squeezed her eyes shut, a tear escaping. Hearing it out loud from this terrifying man was a fresh kind of agony. "I know," she whispered. "I'm sorry. I know I'm not. I don't have anything of value to offer you." "Is that right?" Nathaniel finally looked up, his dark eyes piercing right through her. He reached out and tapped a thick ledger sitting on his desk. It was one of the Harrington Holdings account books his men had seized. "I stayed up until 4 a.m. reading these," Nathaniel said quietly. "Richard Harrington is a moron, a complete, unmitigated fool. By all metrics, his company should have gone bankrupt 6 years ago. Yet someone navigated a labyrinth of offshore shell companies, aggressively renegotiated union contracts, and legally dodged over $40 million in federal taxes without triggering a single IRS audit." Nathaniel leaned forward, resting his chin on his steepled hands. "I ran a handwriting analysis on the margin notes. It wasn't Richard's. It was yours." Chloe's heart hammered against her ribs. I just do the bookkeeping." "Don't insult my intelligence, Chloe, and don't insult your own," Nathaniel said, his voice dropping to an intense, magnetic register. "You didn't just balance his books. You built his empire. You are the sole reason that arrogant bastard has had a roof over his head for the last decade. You are a financial prodigy." Chloe stared at him, utterly dumbfounded. For 24 years, she had been mocked, hidden, and starved for a shred of validation. Now the most dangerous crime boss in the Midwest was looking at her not with disgust, but with raw, unadulterated respect. "Here is the reality of your situation," Nathaniel said, standing up and walking around the desk. He towered over her, but he didn't crowd her. "You are not a prisoner here. You are not a maid. And I certainly have no intention of punishing you for your father's sheer stupidity." He gently reached down, taking the briefcase from her tense grip, and set it on the floor. "From this moment on, you work for me," Nathaniel declared. "You will overhaul the Vargas Syndicate's legitimate front companies. You will have a 6-figure salary. You will have a platinum credit card, a personal driver, and an entire wing of this estate to yourself. You will eat what you want, wear what you want, and if any man in my organization speaks to you with anything less than absolute reverence, I will personally cut out his tongue." Chloe's mouth fell open. Why are you doing this?" Nathaniel looked down at her, his gaze dropping briefly to her full hips and soft curves, before returning to her eyes. There was a dangerous, possessive heat in his stare that made her breath catch. "Because, Chloe, unlike your father, I know a priceless asset when I see one. And I don't throw away treasure just because it's not wrapped the way society expects." He reached out his thumb, gently wiping a stray tear from her cheek. "Welcome to the family." 6 months later, the Chicago Underworld did not recognize the Vargas Syndicate. It had evolved from a shadowy, violent organization into an untouchable corporate monolith, and the architect of this terrifying transformation was a 22-year-old woman whom high society had once deemed too heavy to be seen in public. Chloe Harrington was no longer hiding in a basement. Under Nathaniel's protection, she was given absolute authority over the syndicate's financial operations. She aggressively restructured their assets, laundering millions through legitimate high-end real estate developments in Lake Forest and acquiring logistics companies that dominated the Midwest. She sat in boardrooms with executives from Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan, her brilliant mind running circles around men twice her age. But the most profound change wasn't in the Vargas ledgers. It was in Chloe herself. For her entire life, her father had conditioned her to apologize for her existence, to shrink herself to hide her body under oversized coats and muted colors. Nathaniel destroyed that conditioning piece by piece. When she first requested a modest, loose-fitting gray suit for a meeting, Nathaniel had immediately fired the tailor. He flew in a private designer from Milan to custom-fit her wardrobe. "You are the financial head of my empire." Nathaniel had told her, his voice a low rumble, as he stood behind her in the mirrored dressing room, his large hands resting gently on her waist. "You do not hide. You wear silk. You wear crimson. You wear clothes that armor you. You are a queen, Chloe. It is time you let the world see you." He didn't just respect her intellect. He worshipped her. The men in the syndicate, hardened killers and enforcers like Lorenzo, treated her with a reverence bordering on religious devotion. She had doubled their hazard pay, established impenetrable shell companies to protect their families, and streamlined their operations so efficiently that federal wiretaps went entirely dead. To the Vargas men, she was the untouchable empress. But the peace could not last. Across the city, Richard Harrington's life was collapsing. Without Chloe to perform miracles on his fraudulent accounts, Harrington Holdings was bleeding cash. The IRS had launched a massive probe, his creditors were circling like vultures, and the banks had frozen his assets. Desperate and facing prison, Richard did the unthinkable. He reached out to Dominic Russo, the head of the rival Russo family, a brutal old-school Mafia faction that controlled the South Side. Richard had a proposition. He knew the Vargas syndicate was suddenly flush with legitimate capital buying up the Gold Coast properties Richard had lost. He deduced that Chloe was behind it. Richard offered Russo a deal, help him kidnap Chloe to force her to fix his company, and in exchange, Richard would give Russo the security codes to the Vargas syndicate's primary shipping warehouses, which he had retained from his initial dealings with Nathaniel. Russo, eager to cripple his younger, smarter rival, agreed. The trap was set for a Friday night. Chloe had stayed late at the Vargas corporate tower overlooking the Chicago River. Nathaniel was across town handling a supply dispute, leaving Chloe with only a standard security detail. As her private town car pulled into the underground parking garage, a reinforced black van slammed into the side of her vehicle. The shatter of safety glass echoed through the concrete cavern. Before Chloe's driver could draw his weapon, 4 heavily armed men, wearing tactical masks, surrounded the car, pulling the driver out and pistol-whipping him to the floor. The rear door was yanked open. A man grabbed Chloe by the arm, violently dragging her out of the plush leather seat. She stumbled, her breath catching in her throat, but she did not scream. 6 months with Nathaniel Vargas had taught her that panic was a useless currency. "Get in the van, sweetheart," the masked man snarled, shoving a cold barrel against her ribs. "Your daddy wants you home." Chloe's blood ran cold. Her father. Before she could take a step toward the van, a horrific metallic screech pierced the air. The heavy steel roll-up doors of the parking garage violently slammed shut, sealing them inside. The overhead fluorescent lights abruptly cut out, plunging the garage into absolute darkness. The Russo thugs cursed frantically, raising their weapons and clicking on their tactical flashlights. The beams of light sliced through the darkness, darting across the concrete pillars. Then, a single spotlight snapped on at the far end of the garage. Standing in the center of the blinding halo of light was Nathaniel. He wasn't wearing his usual tailored suit. He wore a black tactical vest over a dark Henley, a suppressed Sig Sauer in his right hand. The look on his face was not anger. It was a cold, apocalyptic emptiness that promised absolute slaughter. "Drop her," Nathaniel commanded. The words were spoken softly, but they echoed off the concrete walls with terrifying authority. "Back off, Vargas," the man holding Chloe yelled, though his voice trembled. He pressed his gun harder into Chloe's side. "We take the girl or we paint the floor with her." Nathaniel didn't blink. He didn't even raise his weapon. He simply pulled a sleek remote from his pocket and pressed a single button. Instantly, the headlights of 30 Vargas Syndicate SUVs blazed to life in the darkness, forming a complete circle around the Russo men. Lorenzo and dozens of Nathaniel's elite enforcers stepped out of the Shadow's laser sights, piercing the gloom, creating a grid of red dots entirely covering the 4 kidnappers' chests and heads. The man holding Chloe froze, realizing they had just walked into an impeccably designed slaughterhouse. "You think I don't monitor the telecommunications of every rat in this city?" Nathaniel said, slowly walking forward, his footsteps echoing like a ticking clock. "You think Dominic Russo can arrange a meeting with Richard Harrington at the Peninsula Hotel without my intelligence network knowing the exact brand of scotch they ordered?" Nathaniel stopped 10 feet away. He leveled his dark, murderous gaze at the man holding Chloe. "Take your hand off my wife." Chloe gasped. The Russo men stiffened. Even Lorenzo's eyes widened slightly in the shadows. Wife. It was a title he had never spoken aloud, a terrifying declaration of permanence and possession in the underworld. The thug slowly raised his hands, dropping his weapon to the concrete. The others followed suit, their knees hitting the ground in immediate surrender. Lorenzo's men surged forward, dragging the men away into the darkness, leaving only silence in their wake. Nathaniel dropped his gun into his holster and closed the distance between them. He didn't ask if she was okay. He grabbed her by the waist and pulled her flush against his chest, burying his face in her hair, inhaling her scent like oxygen. Chloe wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face into his shoulder, her heart pounding furiously against his tactical vest. "He sent them," Chloe whispered, her voice cracking for the first time. "My father." Nathaniel pulled back, looking down at her, his hands gently framing her face. His thumb traced her jawline, his eyes burning with a lethal devotion. "I know Mia, Regina, and now we end him. On your terms." 2 weeks later, the annual Chicago Philanthropy Gala was held at the historic Drake Hotel. It was the crown jewel of the high society calendar, a glittering sea of diamonds, champagne, and ruthless networking. Richard Harrington was there, sweating through his tuxedo. He was a desperate man playing his final hand. His deal with the Russo family had gone horribly wrong. His contacts had simply vanished. His company was 48 hours away from being publicly seized by the federal government. His only hope was to find a new investor tonight, someone to float him a $50 million lifeline to keep the illusion alive. He stood near the crystal ice sculpture, aggressively pitching to a bored hedge fund manager, when the string quartet suddenly stopped playing. A heavy, breathless silence fell over the grand ballroom. The clinking of champagne flutes ceased. Richard turned toward the grand mahogany double doors at the entrance, annoyed by the interruption. His jaw dropped, or the blood drained from his face entirely. Standing at the top of the velvet-carpeted stairs was Chloe. But it wasn't the daughter he remembered. She wasn't hiding behind an oversized wool coat or staring at the floor. She looked like a goddess of war. She wore a custom deep emerald green velvet gown that hugged every curve of her full figure with unapologetic, breathtaking elegance. Her hair was swept over one shoulder in dark, cascading waves, and around her neck rested the infamous Vargas diamond, a necklace worth more than Richard's entire remaining portfolio. She stood with her spine straight, her chin raised, exuding a terrifying, radiant power. And standing right beside her, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back, was Nathaniel Vargas, the apex predator of the city. He wore a razor-sharp Tom Ford tuxedo, his dark eyes sweeping over the ballroom like a king surveying his conquered territory. Whispers erupted through the crowd like wildfire. "Is that Richard's daughter, the heavy girl? She looks incredible. Is she with Vargas? Oh my God, Vargas is here." Richard felt his knees go weak. He pushed through the crowd, panic overriding his survival instincts. He stumbled to the bottom of the stairs, looking up at the daughter he had sold for a fraction of what she was clearly worth. "Chloe." Richard choked out his voice, pathetic in the quiet room. What are you doing here with him?" Chloe slowly descended the stairs, Nathaniel moving in perfect sync with her. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, giving them a wide, terrified berth. She stopped 2 feet away from her father. She didn't flinch. She didn't look down. "Good evening, Richard," Chloe said, her voice smooth, calm, and utterly devoid of affection. Richard's eyes darted frantically to Nathaniel, then back to Chloe. He tried to put on his old mask of authority, the one he used to bully her into submission. "You need to come home right now, Chloe. You've had your little rebellion. I need you back at the office. The auditors are coming on Monday, and you have to fix the ledgers. Tell this thug you're leaving." A terrifyingly cold smirk played on Nathaniel's lips, but he remained silent, letting his queen handle her court. Chloe let out a soft, elegant laugh. It was a sound that made Richard's blood run cold. "I won't be fixing your ledgers, Richard," Chloe said, reaching into her emerald clutch. She pulled out a thick folded legal document adorned with the gold seal of the state of Illinois. She casually tossed it onto the floor at his feet. "What is this?" Richard stammered. "That is a notice of absolute foreclosure and hostile acquisition," Chloe said loudly enough for the surrounding billionaires and socialites to hear. "For the last 6 months, I've been buying up your debt through anonymous shell companies. Every loan you defaulted on, every mortgage you couldn't pay, every marker you left on the street. I bought it all." Richard's eyes widened in sheer horror. "No, you couldn't have. I own your penthouse. I own your corporate tower. I own your cars, your offshore accounts, and the very tuxedo on your back," Chloe stated, her voice slicing through the silent ballroom like a scalpel. "You threw me to the wolves because you thought I was worthless. You thought I was just a fat, ugly girl you could trade to save your own pathetic skin." She took a step closer, her eyes flashing with a righteous, furious fire. "But you forgot one thing, Father. I was the one who built your empire, and I am the one who just tore it down. You have absolutely nothing left. You are bankrupt, homeless, and entirely irrelevant." Richard fell to his knees, right there on the ballroom floor. The high society elite he had spent his life trying to impress were staring at him with undisguised pity and disgust. He reached out with trembling hands, trying to grab the hem of Chloe's dress. "Please, Chloe," he sobbed, the polished businessman completely shattered. "I'm your father. I'm sorry. Please don't leave me with nothing." Before his fingers could even brush the velvet of her gown, Nathaniel stepped forward. The movement was so fast, so utterly lethal, that the crowd gasped. Nathaniel's heavy leather shoe slammed down squarely on Richard's wrist, pinning it to the marble floor. Richard screamed in agony. "Do not touch her!" Nathaniel hissed his voice, dropping an octave, radiating pure violence. "If you ever speak her name again, if you ever look in her direction, I will not bother ruining your finances. I will bury you in a landfill where no one will ever find you." Nathaniel removed his foot. Richard scrambled backward, clutching his bruised wrist, weeping openly on the floor. Chloe looked down at the pathetic man who had tormented her for 2 decades. She felt no sadness. She felt no anger. She only felt remarkably beautifully free. She turned to Nathaniel, giving him a soft, radiant smile that completely transformed her face. Nathaniel's deadly expression melted instantly as he looked down at her. He offered her his arm. She took it gracefully. Without another word to the broken man on the floor, the Mafia boss and the financial genius turned and walked out of the Drake Hotel, leaving the shattered remains of Richard Harrington's life behind them. Outside, the freezing Chicago wind whipped around them, but Chloe had never felt warmer. She wasn't a punishment anymore. She was the prize, and as Nathaniel pulled her into the back of their waiting car, his lips capturing hers in a fierce, consuming kiss, she knew she finally ruled the world. What a satisfying ending to an unbelievable story. Chloe proved that true power comes from intelligence, resilience, and knowing your absolute worth, no matter what society tells you. Did Richard Harrington get exactly what he deserved, or was Chloe too harsh? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. If you loved this story of mafia, revenge, and romance, smash that like button, share this with your friends, and subscribe for more thrilling, dramatic stories every single week.